Hey, Grace City, welcome to the Friday Quicks, and I cannot wait to be with you this week as we are in our series entitled On Set in the book of James. And we're continuing in chapter 2, um, beginning in verse 5. And this week, verse 8 says these words: If you really keep the royal law found in the scriptures, love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing right. But if you are partial or show favoritism, you sin and convicted by the law as a lawbreaker. Have you ever lived in a neighborhood? I know living in West Baltimore, where there were people on the block that didn't necessarily represent what the block and the community was about. One of the things that I remember as a child is that it was a group of us that were there in the neighborhood, and they called us the homeowners. But there were people that would move in the neighborhood who weren't homeowners, they were actually renters. And I remember, the homeowners would have things going on and invite each other over, but they won't necessarily invite those who were the renters. This week, James is calling us and raising a question this morning about this idea of when God says loving God and loving neighbor. He's really pushing us and asking, who is our neighbor? Is our neighbor just someone that believes like we believe, that's inside of the group, or have the same economic position we're in? Or is the neighbor someone who's outsiders, who's new in the neighborhood, who's could be considered an outcast? James pushes it and says, if you are partial to those who are more fortunate, he questions whether you are really fulfilling the royal law, which is loving God and loving neighbor. Because for James and for Jesus, the neighbor is not just our friends, but a neighbor's people who are outcasts, who are low, who are not necessarily in the same financial position you're in. He calls us all neighbors. And if we're not addressing all neighbors, he questions whether we are actually fulfilling the law of God, the royal law, which is loving God and loving neighbor. Grace City, I challenge us to love God and love neighbors this week. I look forward to seeing you, the ministry of impartiality.